Republic. So welcome now. Inside opposition, we have the team from the Czech Republic. Please welcome them as well. My name is Alex. I'm from Germany. I will be judging this debate together with
Kenza from India.
And Bat from Mongolia.
And without any further ado, I'd like to give the floor to the first speaker of Psychonomy here.
Due to international attempts at power grabbing, the society of Yemen is destitute. There are no hospitals, there's no food aids because they are consistently blocked, and international tensions between supporters of President Hadi and rebels are extremely high. Due to absolute chaos in Yemen, the crimes committed of citizens that reside there, of theft and violence, are not a result of them being evil or bad individuals in society, but rather a result of the state's failure of governance. In post-conflict society, attempting to prosecute the perpetrators risks returning to the absolute chaos that caused this problem in the first place. It's because we regret that. We've happily proposed a motion in post-conflict societies. This House would grant amnesty to perpetrators of crimes rather than seeking prosecution. In this speech, I'll be going over a couple of points on framing before discussing two key substantives. My first on how times of conflict generate crime, the second on how prosecution process that happens in these post-conflict societies is often unjust. On to framing them. A few points under this. The first is noting that this motion is focused on the position in which we are arguing these types of warrants here. Note this takes place in a post-conflict society. So whether this conflict happened from state versus state versus the people, or people versus people, the end goal is always going to be the same in post-conflict societies. A desire that after years of war and tyranny, you would be able to achieve something like peace and stability. Note, that is why on our side of the House, we will consistently uphold that principle over anything else. Because having things like peace and stability is a prerequisite to ever having things like a fair justice system, a sustainable economy for individuals to thrive on their own, or any form of accountability. Second thing under framing is addressing certain characterizations for today's debate. We would like to give a characterization of what crimes happen in conflict-ridden societies. In places like Vietnam, Iraq, and Yemen, in their very, very worst days, we would say almost every individual that was living within those conflict-ridden areas was exposed to some form of crime, whether they were partaking in it or witnessing it. So note, when we talk about these types of arguments and how we are going to be upholding these types of prosecutions, we are talking about a very, very large number of people. We would say, on side proposition, a world that we would heavily advocate for is granting a one-time amnesty for all the crimes that were committed during that conflict time lapse. We think that is pretty simple to be characterized based off of international actors. Now on to our first substantive, which focuses how times of conflict uniquely generate crime. Note, while it is difficult for us as 6 debaters to be able to characterize what living in times of war is like, I think we can be a little bit generous with being able to assume what the lives of these individuals is like. When bullets are blazing past you, when there are screeches of bombs dropping, when you don't know if you're going to be able to have food or water within the next day, weeks, or months, it is absolutely okay to begin falling into the mindset that crime becomes an inevitable means to being able to get to necessary ends. Two ways into how this happens. First is a focus on individual needs. This is things like food, shelter, water, basic things that you need to just be able to live as a human being. These are uniquely denied in times of conflicts because either A, they're destroyed by boots on grounds or rebel forces because they want to harm infrastructure or food aid packages, or B, there's a lack of a sustainable economy for me to be able to participate in to create money for myself to buy groceries or buy a house, or just be able to create food in general. Or 3, international actors begin imposing certain things like sanctions to help me out, yet this uniquely cuts off accessible means of goods and medicines that were once there before my society was in a time of conflict. government to provide me things like welfare. There's no longer a means for me to be able to ensure that I get these types of very, very necessary items to be able to survive. So the alternative becomes things like crimes of acquisition, theft, to be able to looting, to be able to get these types of goods, and basically be able to survive. The second thing is noting what happens for groupings. This happens on a much more broader scale. As a society, we have a desire for things like order, stability, and protection. But all of these things are uniquely denied when your state is either absent or in providing care for you, or simply perpetuating harms actively against you. We think this happens in a multitude of instances of conflict-ridden societies. It means that crimes now, like violently attacking an individual, are no longer me being a selfish person in a society or being a bad citizen, but rather that I am taking a form of self-defense. Because in a conflict-ridden society, I can't call the cops. I can't rely on my government to protect me, which is why we think it's so very clear that if there was no government to be able to provide you these types of things to sustain your life as a citizen, then there should be no government to try and hold you accountable and prosecute you when they decide to make their own case. Since it seems to be a very serious POI, go ahead.
Look, this is not exclusive to post-conflict societies. You still have low-income communities in many developing nations where you don't have the very same thing. Does your principle extend to these communities as well?
No, because in a non-conflict society where there are governments that aren't looking out for low-income people, we think there's still a way to be able to demand certain welfare programs. I literally just spent 5 minutes of my speech telling you why uniquely, in times of conflict-ridden societies, there's never going to be a mechanism for your state to be able to provide to you. Oftentimes, the state is actively against you. Second substantive is how the prosecution process is uniquely unjust in conflict-ridden societies. Even if you buy that people are guilty and that they need to be upheld and get some form of accountability on their side of the house, note that this argument still takes them at their best. The state of post-conflict society has a uniquely faulty actor providing justice for a mass amount of people. Let's just walk through these types of conflicts and analyze why this is true. When it's state versus state scenarios, like what happened in Vietnam, we think oftentimes what this looks like is one state winning. This state then begins to use their power through militaristic ways, which can create harsher crackdowns, longer sentences, and unfair trials against a small minority of people that was once beat in an already used out conflict. The second would be one that focuses on state versus people. We think the vast majority of instances, when it comes to these types of conflicts, the state has the ability and advantage to always be able to win against the people. Thus, you access the same type of crackdown that I just addressed under the first point. But third is a more different type of scenario that happens in conflicts. One that focuses on people versus people. Note that when it comes to things like civil wars or ethnic conflicts, post-conflict uniquely means that someone has won this. So new rulings of the new ruling ethnic class now has an incentive to be able to provide faulty trials when they're bringing up old issues that have already been resolved. We say these create very faulty tasks of being able to uphold a criminal justice system. We don't think that this is necessarily fair. But now, we have to address why this is so important. Remember the framing that I gave you at the very top of this speech, where the most important thing that needs to be upheld in post-conflict societies to ever being able to achieve things like sustainability and peace is being ensured that you have fair processes. This uniquely ensures that you never get those types of things. Very proud to propose.
Thank you very much for your speech. This will take some seconds. Now I'd like to call on the first speaker of side opposition. Yeah. So before you start, I'd like to remind everyone in the room that apart from the speaker and people offering POIs, everyone else has to remain somewhat quiet in order for us to hear this speech. Thank you.
the civil war in Serbia between ethnic Albanians and ethnic Serbs, the president Slobodan Milošević has ordered the generals to rape Albanian women as an act of deterrence in war. They give you a false characterization of what crimes are actually being committed, and nowhere in their case have they justified crimes like rape or other types of war crimes. That is why they fail to take the burden in this debate, and that is why they lose. The second speech is too late. 4 things in my speech, or 3 things in my speech. First, our stance. Second, some rebuttal. Third, an argument to why we create better post-conflict societies. 3 points to our stance. First, we say that actually what happens in reality is that you punish both sides of the conflict equally for the crimes that both perpetrators from both sides have committed. Why is that so? This leads me to the second point. How does this actually work in reality, right? We say that no thank you, you have like international organizations that oversee these conflicts and that very often, for example, have peacekeepers in these conflicts and gather massive amounts of intel or have other forms of intel gathering through which they have evidence. In this case, these people that have committed the crimes very often are tried in institutions like the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court in Hague. And we see these processes as analogous to the Nuremberg trial that has happened after the Second World War, in which Americans, Germans, Russians, and people from Britain have all been charged for the crimes that they have committed. And thirdly, we say that the punishment we have is actually proportional to the crime that is being done. That is to say, no thank you, when someone steals something, they do not like get a life sentence, right? We say that their life is actually pretty okay. Now to the rebuttal. Firstly, to their characterizations. No thank you. We say that like most people in the acts of war do not actually steal or do not actually kill other people out of necessity. You're very often like trying to keep your own agency in the fact that you act in accordance to laws. You do this only out of like the gravest necessity, right? But second, we say that they completely mischaracterized the world here because it's not just petty crimes out of necessity, it's also acts such as war crimes and such as rape, right? Now to their first argument on why we disproportionately punish those that have just been doing crimes out of necessity, right? So first, there is a thing in the justice system or principle that is called extenuating circumstances. This means that when you have committed a crime out of necessity, that is to say, like you would literally die if you would have not stolen some food or some water, right? It's not a crime because you have prevented something worse. And the very same thing is present with self-defense, because if someone attacks you and you defend yourself, it is also not taken as a crime. And by this, a large portion of their case falls. No, thank you. But like, secondly, we say that here, then they are inconsistent in principle, because they say that the government does not provide for the needs of these people, but like many governments in developing countries also do not provide for the needs of the poorest people, and yet they say they should not be justified in committing crimes. We say that they have to correct this in their second speech. Second argument. 2 main reactions here. Like, firstly, we do not agree with the contextualization that the people are mostly tried in these countries, but like, secondly, we believe that even if they would be, we say that the impacts of not punishing people that have committed massive war crimes would be really bad, as I will show you in my own argument on why we create a better and more just post-conflict society by upholding 3 principles of law. First, retribution, second, deterrence, and third, incapacitation. Before I start with retribution, go.
Court of justice make sure that they prosecute individuals like giant war criminals or generals. Note, our side of the house is focused on the in-state government that harms those individuals that take crimes of acquisition during conflict.
Like, we don't agree with this character. Yeah, like, sure, they punish these, but they punish them like on both sides. Like, we don't see the implications of this point, really. Okay, so firstly, to the point about retribution. 3 points here. First, we say that like there are people that have just done crimes that are so repugnant and so disgusting that they simply have to be punished for the sole virtue that they have committed these crimes, because we simply, as a society or as like a human population, cannot accept them. So when someone orders like a genocide of a village, you just simply have to punish that person no matter what are the implications of that punishment, because you cannot let people like these go unpunished. But second, we say that very often families in the countries that are post-conflict feel unsafe insofar as the people that have created a lot of the conflict are not punished. Note that you feel like your own state is very often going against you, or you feel like there is, or you have sleepless nights because you know that someone that has raped your mother is out there free. You are not happy and you feel unsafe. But thirdly, we say that very often, not punishing people creates vigilante justice. And why is this so important? Because you feel like justice has not been done. You feel like the people still need punishment. And this is especially important like in post-conflict societies where there is still a lot of tension, when there is still a lot of unresolved business. So they tip the point and people are on their side more likely to commit this vigilante justice. And why is this so wrong? Because people cannot assess the situation as objectively as the courts that we are talking about can, which means that justice is not being done. But even if this were not true, they just very simply increase the tensions between the two groups or more groups in the post-conflict society, which stifles the ability for them to achieve a nation that is peaceful. Second layer, the principle of deterrence. 2 points here. First, you set a powerful precedent in a society once you punish the people that have committed these heinous crimes. Why? Because your society or your government very often is starting from scratch, which means that you need to establish the rule of law. You need to set some principles, and you need to, for example, uphold human rights, no thank you, that set the direction of the way in which the country will be headed. You cannot tolerate intolerance and these crimes. And this has two major implications. First, it affects the mindset of the people in the country, because insofar as they see that the war criminals in the country have been punished, they know that this is something that is not tolerated, and their mindset, no thank you, will cater to this principle as well. But second, it sets sort of a way in which the politics of the country should head as well. That is to say, the politics of the country will also strive to go for these principles, to stand for human rights, because they know that this is the right thing insofar their society has been built on these principles. But the second layer here is that if there were to be a conflict in the future, in the country that is post-conflict or in any other country, we set a precedent that these crimes will very simply not be tolerated, which means that there is a large deterrence towards the people that would have committed these crimes to not commit them, because they know that they will not be safe after the conflict is over. Third principle, incapacitation. Very simply, the generals and the people that commit war crimes, or people that enjoy the war crimes and they are high on the power that they get during the war, which means that they very often have an incentive to commit these crimes in the future again. And we need to incapacitate them in order for them to stop harming the society, because they would do so if they were free, which means that we create a safer society that adheres to the most fundamental law principles under our side. They mischaracterize the debate. Vote aye.
Thank you very much for your speech. We can have a statement. Welcome now the second speaker of Side Governance.
Opposition made this debate as messy as they possibly could have. Let's be very clear. We have a pretty different interpretation of what this motion is dealing with. They say proposition has to defend murder and rape and nothing else. Proposition's characterization is wrong because it ignores the majority of the heart of this debate about the crimes of the populace in post-conflict states, the crimes of the people who lived in these states. Prefer our definition because it encompasses more people. At the end of the day, we don't really think the motion setting committee wanted this debate to be about whether or not we should let murderers and rapists go free, but also at the end of the day, if we have to bite that bullet, we're willing to do so. To be clear, our definition is better for the round because we're closer to the heart of the motion, but we will engage on Proposition's best ground anyways. In this debate, a few things. First, refutation to opposition's framing, then 2 questions to evaluate this round, which side is principally just, which side is practically better, before moving on to my third substantive argument about how this is worse for the people who are prosecuted. So under their framing, they say they would punish both sides and it would be done by an international organization. A few responses here. First, it is so unlikely that if one state wins, that both states are going to be held accountable. Moreover, we tell you, the UN is a terrible and weak actor. Like, the UN couldn't have less accountability and couldn't have less enforcement mechanisms. The best enforcement mechanism they give you is peacekeepers. The same peacekeepers who rape and murder in order to preserve stability. We don't understand how by advocating for peacekeepers, the harms aren't congruent on their side of the house. Moreover, this debate, we tell you in Proposition 1 by this House, very clearly means should the post-conflict states and their domestic criminal justice systems hold people liable. So even if you buy all of their analysis about international organizations, we don't think that's unique to this debate. We think that can still happen on our side of the House. What then is who wins on the principle? They broadly give you an argument about retribution and holding people accountable, particularly for egregious crimes like rape and murder. We have 4 responses. First, we say peace and stability always outweigh because that's a prerequisite to having a justice system which can hold these things accountable. I'll answer that in the practical portion of my speech. Secondly, it assumes that these repentant crimes are ever pursued. 2 reasons why they wouldn't. 1, if it is true that these military officials command these awful things and then the military wins, we think it is more than likely the military would not then prosecute themselves. Secondly, even if that's not the case and it's a more benevolent state that wins, the burden is still on the victim to come forward and even lead to the prosecution in the first place. Our third response is that their argument assumes that the good state always wins. We say the harms are worse on their side of the house because bad actors will always crack down on the dissidents who fought against them but didn't win the conflict. But good actors, their best case scenario, only sometimes prosecute some people. They can't possibly prosecute every single murder and rape, but in every single case, the bad actors will find a way to crack down on the people they see as a threat to their stability. Fourthly, we win on the number of people who actually access justice. Turn this argument against them, because at best they win victims, but we say the vast majority of people are being denied justice in a world in which they committed crimes of acquisition which were caused by the state. The only way to give those people retribution is by granting them amnesty for crimes which they had no alternative but to commit. What did we hear in response to Layla's substantive material about how this is literally self-defense? They said, well, extenuating circumstances can be wiped off in court. I mean, come on. How assertive can that response be and how hopeful can it be that courts are somehow not going to prosecute these crimes? We think in the majority of cases, when bad actors win, they are likely to do so, even if it's good actors, this will be upheld in court. Then they said this is an inconsistent principle. One that ignores Layla's detailed analysis about how the government abdicated their responsibility, thus this is unique. Secondly, if they want to push this on us, fine, we'll take the radical stance that if you're starving, poor people should be able to steal bread. On to the practical. What did they give you? They said that it will lead to deterrence. We say this is contingent on proving that they are ever deterred because their actor finds a way to hold people culpable. But at the end of the day, if you think the UN isn't an efficient actor, the deterrence can never happen. If it were true that deterrence would happen, we wouldn't see conflict states in the status quo. What did Layla tell you? They destroy stability. Why is stability so much worse on their side of the house? There are 2 groups that become disillusioned. The majority majority and the losers. The majorities are the people concerned with the crimes of acquisition and self-defense. They're most likely to be prosecuted because they have a lack of resources to fight it. But the masses now see the state as an illegitimate state because it's punishing people for crimes that the government created. Moreover, they disrupt society because they take out the community leaders of the masses. Why? Because these community leaders are the people most likely to take the risk upon themselves to commit these crimes. So even if they win, they hold everyone accountable. They're taking out the community leaders who keep things safe. At the point in which they get massive amounts of people who are disillusioned by the state, if anything, they just create more instability. Why is instability the thing you should worry about in this round? It's necessary because if stability isn't guaranteed, all of their harms are inevitable because you create more conflict states. You create more rape and murder on their side of the house. You create more war crimes. So if proposition sufficiently proves that their side of the house creates states which are likely to be unstable and fall back into conflict, then we commandeer everything that opposition one told you. I'll now move on to my third substantive argument, which is on how post-conflict prosecution is terrible for prisoners. Post-conflict criminal justice systems are not cheery. They're likely to be worse in their world for a few reasons. First is a lack of resources. I'll take that one.
Look, if you characterize these countries as so terrible and so unjust, how do you know that they will just let their opposition go free?
Because the motion guarantees us that amnesty. The first reason is that a lack of resources. Irrespective of the type of conflict, the state is likely to be strapped for cash. Either it's a new state, or they spend tons of money on preserving their sovereignty. As a result, the state is unlikely to achieve justice for these people. Their best case scenario, because when prosecutors have limited resources, they can only afford to choose the cases that they know they can win. Poor and marginalized folks that can't afford legal fees to protect themselves are most likely to be prosecuted. But the rich and powerful, the people most likely to commit the most heinous crimes that they talk about, the actual generals are likely to insulate themselves because they are the ones in power to create the preconditions for these crimes. Because they can do things like bribe prosecutors, lobby officials, afford good lawyers, or at the worst, literally move away from the country because they have the most to lose. The second reason this is so bad is because systems become very punitive. In every single case, a post-conflict state is in pursuit of stability. It doesn't matter if it's relatively benevolent or a military takeover, they become more punitive. In order to put up the facade of stability, they start being as punitive as possible. What does this look like? It looks like increased police brutality on the front end, increased corruption within the actual legal system that skews towards incarceration, and terrible conditions once people get to prison in the name of stability. As a result, at best, proposition achieves bad prosecution for not the people committing the most crimes. At worst, they're actively making the state even more unstable. Proud to propose.
Thank you very much. We can come and take some time. To the second speaker of the opposition.
I want to challenge third proposition speaker to tell me if they regret the Nuremberg trials that gave 6 million Jews who were killed in concentration camps and in World War II, which includes a large chunk of my family, by the way, that they regret it because although it gave them solace. I want third proposition speaker to tell me that they don't care that the women who were raped in the Yugoslavian civil war did, or that they did feel justice and did feel solace when they blamed that one individual who marked them for the rest of their lives. I want them to take that burden and also take us on our highest ground. Look, they have a major strategic issue on their side of the house. They tell us, you do not have the political capital to have international communities, right, to help you. But at the same time, they assume they have the political capital to make amnesty work, to make sure that these, that amnesty will be upheld and there won't be other individual belligerents or oppressive groups, no thank you madam, that will go against the ruling party. If anything, we tell you amnesty is far, far harder to regulate because it's based on an individual basis, whereas here we take the individuals and we prosecute them at large. Look, first I'll be asking the question of where is this post-conflict society safer and more stable? Second, I'll be having a look at the principal layer of today's debate, and finally I'll be reading my own extension on how we give more power to the international community, or these developing nations in the international community. Okay, let's just have a look at the major comparative when it comes to what these conflict states look like. We have major issues on side one. First, vigilante justice. We got no reaction in DPM here. Why is this so problematic? Because look, the framing of today's debate is that, you still have the conflict going on in these individuals. Because look, it doesn't end, the individual conflict of your political identity. The fact that you've been in war for the past 6 months to a year does not end at the point at which you lose. It ends only when you're killed, or after many, many years when you feel, okay, this is genuinely over. At that point, we tell you it's incredibly probable that the victims of these heinous crimes, like rape, like various other abuse, will take arms up against these individuals who are not prosecuted because they want this justice for themselves. Second, we tell you this is incredibly probable because of a mass power vacuum that happens on their side of the house because you don't have anyone present that would regulate it. Third, we tell you there will be individuals who are the most extreme, therefore those who lost, who still have an innate desire to inflict major harm. Let's not get this wrong. War makes people go crazy. It was the case in Vietnam, it was the case in Iraq, when US soldiers were literally testing out their sniping skills on women in villages. At that point, we tell you these individuals just get a sense of power from having that done and want this to continue irrespective of this conflict being over. We solve this on our side of the house because first, those individuals who would be shooting for the sake of having social status and power are put into jail for life, meaning this links with our principle of incapacitation. Second, what we tell you is those individuals who feel that they are victims and that don't get proportional solace or proportionate justice, then we tell you they won't go up because the person who inflicted the harm is in jail, or the opposing side is a significant, their power to inflict harm is significantly increased. Second, the major harm on their side is there is little deterrence. Look, the mindset in the long run here is, if I go start a civil war, if I go into war, the worst case is, oh, it's okay guys, we'll just all say sorry and we'll go home. That is very little deterrence on their side of the house, right? What on our side of the house happens is you still have the option of being killed for your heinous acts in a moment, sir, of going to jail for life for those acts. And we tell you this will deter a vast majority of people, and those who won't be deterred by death or licenses won't be deterred on any side of the house. So quantitatively, we deter far more people. This is significant because in the long run, there's a far lower probability that there will genuinely be conflicts. Therefore, we tell you to go one way. Do you disagree?
What successful enforcement mechanisms do the United Nations have to hold people accountable to get this deterrence?
I'd like to talk about this in a moment. Let me just finish this third use benefit that you guys have. Look, third, the tensions are still really, really high. Meaning you still have political activists after the US, UK, and Australia invaded Iraq. Still tensions were massive, right? You still had political journalists or talking and voicing hatred towards their opponents, right? This never goes away on their side of the house. They're mobilizing people through these general protests. We tell you, we take this away because these people, once they start doing it, go to jail. Therefore, they say low probability. Why do we get accountability on our side of the house? First of all, they say, oh, the UN is inefficient, right? Okay, that's simply just not true. Like, we tell you very often, like, peacekeepers are very efficient in what they do, particularly if they do these heinous acts. By law, they have to have cameras on their helmets, meaning we're capable of tracing it back and keeping them accountable. Second, we tell you, like, they have a structural incentive to give us an objective view, because it's also in their incentive to actually protect these countries. No, thank you. We believe if it was so inefficient, like, there'd be huge backlash, and this wouldn't, like, they wouldn't even exist in the first place. But most importantly, we take out vigilante justice simply, no thank you madam, simply because these vigilantes don't have an opportunity, we give you more deterrence, and these tensions just aren't pressing because those who are stirring these tensions go to jail. Look, what's the principal comparative in today's debate? It was very much like the rebuttal was based on this idea of like, oh, the international community is bad and therefore they can't uphold this, right? First of all, I already refuted that, therefore we believe it still stands. But let me talk about the principle of incapacitation, which they really neglected here. At the point at which these individuals are heinous, they're twisted, they're repugnant, and they don't care about what others feel, and a gun gives them power, they are dangerous. They are led to roam free on side of opposition. At that point, those individuals who are already most vulnerable, those who don't have access to food, water, shelter, are even put at greater risk because of these individuals roaming free. Second, they talk about retribution and how they get more retribution on their side of the house. Look, at this point we tell you very often these aren't crimes that will be prosecuted most, because if they're so large in quantity, it's probable we won't even have the time to probably solve them. If we do, we see it as extenuating circumstances, and will be very, very low prosecution. So we believe these people are still protected. Therefore, on principle, we tell you we take today's debate. Let me talk about my extension on how these developing nations, or these post-conflict nations, get a larger position in the international community. Because what is what is the general consensus of the international community, particularly the UNSC, on this soft power solution they have? Note the UNSC is composed of Russia, China, US, France, relatively hard power nations that want a safer role generally with a resolute solution. At the point at which we still have the framing of today's debate of having these people run free, there are still dangers, there's still major political activism for these radicals. We tell you they just feel that A, the states are tolerating these heinous narratives, and they're tolerating these crimes because they're not prosecuting these individuals. We tell you at that point, there's a far smaller probability there will be any assistance in these post-conflict nations from the international community. Because Donald Trump himself left the UN Human Rights Commission because he believed China was in there and that was wrong because they were infringing on human rights. At the point at which you're accepting the burden that people are still raped on your side of the house and the perpetrators are not punished, we tell you it's very, very probable this won't happen. We think it's the same like having sanctions imposed in Myanmar because the people who committed the heinous Rohingya genocide weren't prosecuted. We tell you this is incredibly pernicious for these people because you often do need these Western assistance to satisfy that power vacuum that we talked about and give them moderate or help them rebuild this infrastructure. At the point at which the international community leaves you, you have a fractured community and you have radicals and rampant unprop, you should go back.
Thank you very much for your speech. We have a 7 minutes 14. Now please welcome the third speaker of the government here.
There's a lot of difference in characterization, so the first thing I want to do in speech is just talk about characterization for a minute before breaking down the substantive material. There are 3 arguments I want to make here. The first one is that the heart of this debate is about whether the state, for being in the situation of a conflict society, justifies the crimes that are committed in that society, and how that state of conflict influences people's mindsets when they're about to commit crimes. That is the heart of the debate. That is where the criminal justice portion of the debate lies. That is where the philosophical portion of the debate lies. Why is proposition's characterization so much more central to this debate? The debate is not Nuremberg trials, good, bad, Nazis, good, bad, Nazis, prosecution, question mark. The debate is significantly more complicated than that and more nuanced than that. We've brought you characterization about post-conflict societies. Just because a state went to war doesn't make it a post-conflict society. After George Bush randomly decided to invade Iraq, it didn't make the US a post-conflict society. The characterization the proposition is brought to you is that these are places where geographically the area itself has gone through large amounts of conflict. Therefore, the government that is likely to be formed, the government that is the actor of this motion, is likely to engage in all of the incentive structures that we've brought you. The second point I want to make here is that it is about the perspective of domestic government. We were clear about this from the Proposition 1 in our framing, which means the opposition is too late to decide. The third thing is that I'm not only just quibbling about the model. Let's say you take some of opposition characterizations at hand and say that some of their characterizations are right. Proposition, additional to our characterizations, has made incentive-based arguments for why these governments are likely to engage in these practices. We've said in a post-conflict society, the new government is likely to be weaker because it doesn't have the ability to maintain lots of infrastructure or a strong criminal justice system. We've also said that the new governments are likely to want to pursue stability, and thus they're more likely to engage in abusive practices. Which means even if you think the characterization debate is just us quibbling about definitions to each other, you know that proposition has engaged in an incentive analysis that makes our arguments significantly more likely, but also from the Proposition 1, we were willing to take them at their highest ground, which I will do thoroughly in this speech. The first thing I want to touch on is on the notion of broader stability. Before I go into that, your point.
It just doesn't work like that in real life. We gave you examples where our policy has happened. The Nuremberg trials, Yugoslavia. It wasn't the respective governments doing it, it was the international community. That's just how it works.
Well, also in a lot of those post-conflict societies, those governments themselves also have to decide what they're going to do with the people that committed crimes while the conflict is going on. But in this speech, I will take you at your highest ground in those examples in just a second. Let's talk about broader stability for a second. This is the most important impact in debate, and opposition cannot run away from this because we've told you from the Proposition 1 that stability is the most important thing. Luke expanded upon this in his last speech where he talked about why stability is a necessary prerequisite to get this justice in the first place, and the worst possible thing for post-conflict societies is returning to a state of war. By what mechanisms do we think proposition acts as this? First, let's discuss heavily what state incentives there are to prosecute which crimes. Luke gave you a couple, and Leila gave you a couple that I think were not responded to. One, these populations don't have the ability to fight back. Crimes of acquisition particularly, the state can round them up and place them in prison because those populations won't have the ability to fight back. They themselves give you the incentive structure that these states want to have a perception of stability, that they want to have their own criminal justice systems and their own governments appear to be more legitimate. When that is the state's desire, they're going to go after people that they think they can easily lock away to show up how excellent their government is. Those things that threaten stability. But on our highest ground, you get targeted prosecution. Luke told you that the good guys don't always win. All the arguments I just made are about when the good guys win, what do they do? But when the bad guys win, it's even worse because you get targeted prosecution against certain portions of the population. Then, the second mechanism I want to talk about is that let's say they're correct, that these crimes are not successfully prosecuted, that they're put in jail. But this is still bad for stability in post-conflict societies because you have a large number of the population that is still branded as criminal, whose existence is still illegal, who can't interact with the government. This makes pursuing stability impossible in those societies because those people, even if not jailed, are still carrying around the mark of criminal because they engaged in theft during the conflict itself. That is still right for larger stability. The third is let's talk about their high ground. Some of the examples they're giving, I don't think I want to bite the bullet on, which is like the Nuremberg trials, but let's talk about a more reasonable one. Actually, this is a completely very, very unreasonable one, but here's where we're willing to bite the bullet. Let's talk about post-Civil War United States. Listen to the comparative. Imagine if after the Civil War was just completed, it was completely abolished, the entirety of the United States federal government decided to lock up the parents of every single white family in the South. Yes, it was okay to maybe persecute the generals that fought for the South, but if you attempted to lock up literally everyone that was responsible for crimes in that situation, you would have had Civil War Part 2, which would result in everything that they're talking about becoming significantly worse. Which means even on their highest ground, the most unreasonable, heinous acts that they want us to defend, sometimes in post-conflict society, it might be necessary in the long term to achieve broader stability, to achieve reconciliation, to not prosecute those crimes, which means even in the most heinous of instances, we're talking about at least there is some debate about whether it is good to prosecute or not. What comparative material they bring you? They say we should prosecute crimes like rape and murder. Let's talk about whether they get this on their side of the house because they didn't answer these mechanisms. You don't get prosecution on their side of the house. One, there would be a burden on the victim of these crimes to report these things to the government. In a post-conflict society, that seems unlikely to me. Two, there would be no desire to actually end up these crimes because a lot of times the victims of these crimes don't know the name of the perpetrator. They know that they were just part of the opposing army. And if this is about the domestic post-conflict government, they're not going to be able to have those people within reach anyway. But let's take them on their highest ground, international prosecutions. Here's how body cameras work for the UN peacekeepers. Beep, now it's off. That's how the UN decides to go about. Engaging in all their mechanisms, which means on their side of the house, they have an incentive structure. Then, let's say one state beats another state. In the context of the United Nations is heavily influenced by Western powers, which means that's why the United States got away with like a bunch of war crimes, because there were international mechanisms that favored the United States of America. That's our point about international mechanisms. Then, vigilante justice. If they fail to prosecute, if I win the argument that they were going to fail to prosecute these people, then it makes vigilante justice more likely on their side of the house, because the failures of the criminal justice system will be done there. In a world where we're starting a society from scratch post a conflict, it's much better for everyone to have a clean state. People will be less incentivized to engage in vigilante justice because they don't want to risk losing the stability that has been worked so hard to earn. Their last argument is about international legitimacy and something about the UN Security Council. One, there are a bunch of other reasons why the UN Security Council chooses to or chooses not to recognize states. One of the real important ones for the United States is just like oil, but the whole point here is playing politics with prosecution doesn't really establish a clear link in this argument. Second, if this argument is about the legitimacy of post-conflict states, proposition's material is significantly more necessary to the legitimacy of these post-conflict states because it proves that they shouldn't crack down on certain populations, engage in abusive practices, and there should be a level of amnesty and a clean state to start. The second theme is a little less important because it's just about the principled analysis, which was pretty much missing in their entire two. We brought to you a lot of substantial principled analysis for why the state of being in a conflict justifies the crimes that are committed, and an entire substantive argument about why the prisons in these countries are likely to be abusive in the first place. This would implicate a lot of the material opposition is bringing you because they're not successfully prosecuting these individuals, and if they are successfully prosecuting these individuals, they're not putting them in places that are likely to resolve the conflict for broader society. The reason retributive, horrible prisons that have no good conditions for prisoners are bad is because they take people who committed things like crimes of acquisition and turn them into hardened criminals, which means at OP's highest ground, when they're jailing these people, we think that jails in post-conflict societies actually makes the situation worse off, which means that every layer of the debate, no matter where opposition takes their highest ground, we are winning.
For that speech, it becomes 8 minutes 12. To conclude the substantive part of this debate, we'll call on the third speaker of the opposition.
Because of the fact that proposition argues in a bubble where there are only bad governments and only crimes committed out of necessity, we should take this debate. Just because of that wrong characterization and just because of the fact that they've never engaged with our world and our side. Even though they claim that they take us on our best case scenario, they don't. 2 parts of my speech. First of all, I will tackle some relevant justification and burden of proof, and then I will take a look at this post-conflict society and what will actually happen and what is more probable under both sides of the house. So now, let's take a look at the first part of my speech. Here, first of all, first problem in this debate was that proposition argued only for the crimes committed out of necessity. Even though we've challenged them to explain us, first of all, where is the line? Like, how can you say that this was the crime committed out of necessity and this was not? This was really unclear, and they were never able explain these mechanisms and according to which they are actually pursuing justice. No, thank you. Also, they never show the exclusivity to the post-conflict society because there are more cases where there are crimes committed out of necessity. It is not only in like poor countries, but it can also be in more developed ones. No. Second idea here is the fact that they're saying it is justified to argue for this large number of people. First of all, we told you that we are okay to take this, and because of the fact that our punishments are proportional, nothing terrible happens to those individuals. But secondly, the point here is that we were arguing for the most severe crimes, and the point that they are never really engaged with this does not mean that this criteria is inherently wrong, because these severe crimes are the ones that have the biggest impact on the society. Therefore, they never really reacted, and we should take this debate just on that point. Third, this idea of political capital to intervene and to have our world as its state. No, thank you. First of all, we told you that if they have political capital to propose this amnesty, we have political capital to have international committee that in court takes both sides of in the war and basically makes the justice and tell which punishment according to the evidence they get. Secondly, they also put on us a very unfair burden when they say that we have to argue only for those unfair courts, because at the point at which they're able to push through amnesty in those unfair courts, we are able to have this international committee and to have really fair process. And fourthly, we have this idea of punishment. And this is very important, as they've never engaged with our idea of proportional punishments and the fact that we have extenuating circumstances considered. It's not like that you have a person that, out of necessity, has stolen some food and he will get a life sentence. Not at all. First of all, we really doubt that this person would get to this international court, as this is something that is not that severe, so it is not likely to be considered as some huge crime. But secondly, we also claim that from that point of view, when we have more severe crimes, we are also more likely to have evidence for these crimes, and we need to get punishments. There is this necessity, and they never told us why, in their world, these crimes that were really severe and that caused huge harms to the individuals, because the fact that you stole foods is not something that would create this magnificent harm that would influence the rest of your life. Therefore, no thank you. Finally, here in this punishment, they never justify the fact that they are taking away this punishment as such, because they never engage with the fact that we are claiming this is not principally okay to take away all these punishments committed in the war. So, when I tackle this, now let's move to the idea of post-conflict society and what is happening on the both sides of the house. First idea. They told us, and this was what they claimed throughout the debate, it was the idea that we have bad states and bad governments that are quite weak and that we cannot really make justice there. First of all, no thank you. If we take them on their highest ground and say that this is really the scenario, at the point at which these governments will be able to push through these amnesties, the only thing, because they do not have really high quality, for example, police and other things, there is much more, the backlash is much more likely in these bad governments arising after they impose these amnesties in there. Secondly, we believe that when they want to have safe and peaceful societies, we cannot really argue only in that scenario, because in their world, these countries are much more unstable as they don't have the justice reserved. Yes?
We didn't say definitionally that they're crimes of acquisition or repeat. We gave incentives for why these crimes are likely, even if they're not the majority, and that these crimes, and the crimes you're talking about, are unlikely to be punished. Please engage with our material.
Okay, thank you. I will, but only later in this week, because I want to first of all clarify the Vigilante justice. So now let's take a look here. First of all, we got really little traction, and it is too late in their third speech to come up with the reaction, as I should not really provide you with new content for the debate. But let's take a look at take them on their advice and say that what they're saying that vigilante justice is more likely on our side. We did not really get the analysis put there. The point here is that on our side we have more justice done. When they claim that these rapes and murders are very hard to get some kind of evidence, there is the problem. Because what is more likely that you get the evidence of? The fact that somebody stole food from a shop, or the fact that somebody murdered someone and very likely this was some hard footage, there were witnesses, and that is something that is like much more likely to be evidence. Therefore, the fact that they claim that there is lack of evidence still does not engage with the idea that there are some murders we know who has committed them, and it is too late in their reply to explain what are they doing with these criminals, with the ones that are dangerous to society. Therefore, at the end of the day, the vigilante justice is less probable under our side of the house because we have more justice as such, because we have more of these punishments. Therefore, these individuals do not have the incentive to go and commit the vigilante justice as such. Third, the point that we have the establishment that is good, that is based on law and principles that the society wants to preserve. They've never engaged with this idea that was in our first argument, and this is crucial, as if they want to have stable societies that propose these principles, they cannot do so when this society is based on intolerance and on injustice in the first place. And because of the fact that we want to have stable societies, the ones that keep peace and that makes this deterrence effect and retribution, which was by the way also largely neglected in their case, it means that under our side, the fact that we have stable societies, this scenario is much more likely. And finally, the lack of engagement on this incapacitation point, where we've told you that there are criminals who wants to make more crime, who are just dangerous to society, and we need to punish them because otherwise they will commit more crimes, and this is just wrong for our post-conflict societies. Because for all of these reasons, we're Czech Republic.
Thank you very much for that speech. This speech was 8 minutes and 15 seconds long. Floor to the reply speaker of opposition to replication.
Panel, there are 4 major issues with Team USA today. First, at the point at which they tell you you do not know the name of your rapist or someone who shot someone in your family, but at the same time they say it's probable that you'll find evidence that someone stole bread, we tell you they're contradicting themselves. Because it's far more probable that an infringement as large as shooting someone, as raping someone, will have evidence rather than stealing bread from a local store. This further debate means that their first argument falls on them, because it was contingent on the fact that we prosecute people who are doing crimes of necessity. Insofar as there is no evidence, there is no way we can prosecute them, and even if we do find this evidence, we take it as extenuating circumstances. Second, their second argument also falls, because what they're saying is there will be unjust punishments and these people don't deserve it, like proportionality, right? But insofar as we're not punishing it for them, punishing them because we can't prove it, like there's no contention here. Note, we also told you that we have proportionality. Second, there's this whole issue about political capital, where they say, well, you don't have the political capital to enforce your policy. But at the same time, they never mechanize the fact, how do you ensure that this amnesty is long run? Considering the framework of still having a tense atmosphere, of belligerents still wanting to shoot, and still wanting to gain power, how do they ensure it? And insofar as they have the political capital to do so, we do as well. Therefore, we tell you, this also undercuts their whole analysis when they say we will have a less safe society. And third, they try to weasel out of this notion that they don't have to defend Yugoslavia or Nuremberg. You have to defend it because on your side you would have given these heinous individuals amnesty. You have to show us why this is still okay. Okay. What does this then mean, also for the debate? It means that they're simply weaseling out of cases that are disbeneficial for their side and not engaging. Look, I have two questions. First, which side protects or which side establishes a more stable post-conflict society? And second, I'll talk about the principle largely neglected down the bench on side government. Look, what happens on team government? First, you have a huge amount of vigilante justice and only got a few lines in government with you. Why was this problematic? Because we told you there was a huge incentive for these people to continue doing terrible things on the stakeholder of the individuals who were part of the extremist side, possibly initiating the conflict. Because now that they have a weapon, they get power. Therefore, we told you this is negative because it destabilizes individual on individual relationships. Second, we told you through the victims who felt that they did not get the justice they deserved because someone in their family was killed and the person who killed them, or at least the side responsible, got amnesty and they're running free. We told you we changed this. We changed this because of the incapacitation. Meaning the individuals who would be shooting go to jail. Meaning the individuals who would be voicing through grassroots movements or through political media that this extremism must continue would be put to jail. And put to jail far, far away from these individuals. Therefore, there's a low probability of even spread. That's why you're getting most stable society. And second, what we're telling you is that very often we won't get international help. Why is this so? Because we're telling you to take a soft stance, and this was my extension. We told you it was improbable at the point at which, in general, the international community condemns states that do not solve these issues. We gave you the example of Myanmar. They will not get that help. What this means is you won't get these Western funds. What this means is you won't get the sense of the United States, the bastion of democracy, helping you in solving your conflict. At that point, we tell you, if anything, you have, on their side, people who want to kill, running free, and they're doing nothing about them. And an international community that neglects you. If anything, and this is the second part, is that this is not justified because at that point, the people who they say are most vulnerable are even more vulnerable because not only do they not have shelter and food, but there are people who are willing to kill them. That's why you vote all.
Thank you very much. The time is 4 minutes 9. Last speech in this debate. I now leave the floor to the government's reply speech.
If you think this debate was about the majority of cases, then we have already won. But even if it wasn't about the majority of cases, we explicitly took them on their very highest ground and told you why, for example, reconciliation in the time of slavery in the United States was the best possible path forward to ensure that the country stayed together. In my speech, 2 questions. Which side best fulfills justice, and which side ensures stability in the future? First, on justice. They said they want justice for victims of rape and murder. I mean, come on, obviously. We said we want justice for people who've committed crimes of self-defense. Under this question, we then have to analyze which group is the most likely to be prosecuted. We told you it's always the crimes on our side of the house because masses do not have the ability to protect themselves from prosecution from the states. Moreover, we said, post-conflict states will always have the incentive to be as punitive as possible to appeal to the facade of stability, meaning extenuating circumstances wasn't a good enough response. This is why states will always find a way to lock up these poor people even if they don't have the evidence to do so. Moreover, if it's true that Serbian generals are the ones committing the worst crimes, we told you these rich and powerful people were the ones most likely to get off because they can bribe, lobby, pay legal fees, or at best, literally flee from the country. Let's take them on their very highest ground. If we can only provide justice to one of these 2 stakeholders, why should you always prefer our side of the house? 2 weighing mechanisms. First is the number of people who access justice. We told you this down the bench. The majority of crimes committed in post-conflict states are the ones of retribution, when the vast minority are things like rape and murder, meaning if you're talking about the magnitude of justice, we think it's greater on our side of the house. And secondly, we access the most complete version of our principle, because with amnesty, we guarantee that everyone who is wronged by the state gets justice. But on their side, they're reliant on the state having the incentive, and they're reliant on victims ever coming forward, meaning we won on the principle. But on the practical, which side ensures stability in the future? They told you they do because they deterrence and they lock up terrible people and incapacitate them. We give you a few reasons why this argument was not sufficient. First, if a malicious state wins the war, they have no incentive to prosecute themselves. Secondly, their best case, the benevolent state wins the war and they rely on the United Nations. We told you this was a toothless mechanism that had no enforcement. And at best, their only enforcement mechanism was the answers of POI, and up to is peacekeepers, the same peacekeepers who violently rape and murder people, the same harms they worry about on their side of the house. And on their highest ground, if the UN is the best actor ever, this debate is about domestic prosecution, meaning we could still use it on ours. Why then is stability so bad on their side? First, they get masses of disillusioned people who think the new state is unjustified. Secondly, they wreck communities. This is reconciliation that Ishan told you about. And thirdly, they get more punitive justice systems, which leads to more crime. Ishan told you this turns their arguments. We said that all of these reasons are more compelling than vigilante justice because so few people are willing to go out and deliberately break the law in the name of vigilante justice. Why is this question so important? We said that if the state doesn't stay conflict-free, then all of their harms are inevitable. They don't have a criminal justice system to access retribution. They have more instability because there's more crime. And now they're in conflict, so war crimes and rape and murder keep increasing on their side of the house. At best, they solve the problem now, and it just happens worse in the future. Proud to propose.
Much. We can time was 4 minutes 10. I'd like to invite you, I believe. As the panel, even though we all agree that it was a very close debate, we ultimately came to a unanimous decision, and that unanimous decision is to award the debate to side opposition. The reason, or at least part of the reason why we believe it was a close debate, and also a pretty hard debate to adjudicate, is that both teams could have probably done a better job substantially backing up their respective characterizations of the motion and the circumstances about which we are talking. Specifically, what sort of crimes are we talking about? Why are these crimes the important ones that we should be talking about? Why are the crimes that the other side is talking about less important? And also, why which countries are we talking about? What are the circumstances that differentiate these countries from each other and from countries that are not post-conflict environments? We think that giving us more substantial analysis on all of these points of characterization would have made the debate a little less messy and a little easier to get an overview of. That being said, I'll try to structure this speech roughly into the 3 judging categories, but I warn you now that I'll probably be spending most of my time on content and strategy, mainly because we believe that in terms of style, this debate was rather even. We think that style was very strong on both sides of the house today, particularly in the first proposition and the second opposition speech, but we do not think that style was a deciding factor in today's debate. What this debate then came down to in the categories of content and strategy was 3 main issues, 3 main clashes, you could say. Firstly, the characterization clash. Then following up on that, the analysis as to which side is able to provide stability more reliably. And then ultimately also the principal argumentation, which side does justice better. Starting off with the characterization. We think that while Proposition's characterization of crimes that are committed during times of conflict, often being crimes of necessity, crimes of acquisition, while that does hold some value, Proposition made the mistake of not explaining to us why these are the only crimes we should be talking about, whereas Opposition made it very clear throughout the entire debate that during times of conflict, while these crimes may be happening, we also have other kinds of crimes happening, such as war crimes, such as more serious violent crimes, and that there is a clear burden on Team Proposition to present to us principled argumentation why their side also wins on these crimes. Especially given that Proposition in their framing conceded that in some cases they may have to allow these crimes to go unpunished, and Opposition did a very strong job of pointing out again and again that this cannot go without principled justification, which we believe was kind of lacking on side Proposition in this debate. That being said, we think that Opposition, even though their way of constantly reminding us about these serious violent crimes was an excellent strategic choice in this debate, could have also been more engaging when it comes to Proposition's view on the matter. While there was some analysis, predominantly mitigating analysis on the crimes of acquisition and crimes of necessity, saying that we have extenuating circumstances. In some of these cases, these may not even come to the court's attention because there is a lack of evidence. And then also states can prioritize or deprioritize crimes, and they will tend to deprioritize these. These are all valid points that mitigate this argument on side Proposition, but they do not refute it completely. And some principled analysis on why it is not okay to allow these crimes to happen would have made Opposition stronger in this debate as well. The other major point of characterization is what sort of environment are we talking about? And we think this was a very difficult part of the debate for us to kind of assess, because what both sides said on this was very contradictory, but also not really backed up very well on either side. Proposition came at us with this very scary picture of malicious post-conflict governments that have no interest to really uphold justice in a principled sense of the word, but only try to be as punitive as possible in order to appear strong. Whereas Opposition said, yes, in some circumstances we may have these governments, but we have mechanisms of international oversight, international sanction, both from the UN and from major international powers that will prevent these states from completely going off the rails in what they are doing. We think that both sides did not really do any kind of extended analysis as to which of these two scenarios will be more common in the real world. Proposition did mention some examples of their respective characterization, but did not tell us why it is more likely that in future cases this will be mostly the kinds of situations we will be looking at. Whereas Opposition, while they did concede that sometimes we have to look at this and try to kind of compensate for it with the international oversight, also had trouble explaining to us how this international oversight is actually going to work. And this is where I come to one of the main points of contention in the debate, which was, will international influence, international sanctions, international oversight work, and will it be effective? And Proposition had kind of, no, I'd start with Opposition actually. Opposition said it will be effective because one, we have the UN. The UN has peacekeeping forces, it has the UN's Security Council, which can make these binding resolutions. Peacekeeping forces have been effective in the past. To this, Proposition responded, well, yes, we have peacekeeping forces, but these peacekeeping forces are registered murderers. Sadly, this was also basically the extent of Proposition's response to this point. We think that a bit more mechanistic analysis as to why peacekeeping forces are actually ineffective at accomplishing their job would have been nice on side proposition and would have made it possible for us to believe you on this clash, where in the end we gave the point of peacekeeping forces slightly to side opposition. The other part of opposition's argumentation in backing up their model of international influence was that we would have major global powers. That these major global powers have certain normative approaches, that they want human rights to be upheld, that they want countries to work towards stability in a sustainable way, and that they will thus crack down on these malicious governments that are not acting in those interests. We believe that while this analysis was very rudimentary on opposition, there was not a lot of actual response to it from proposition, other than the idea that we have an imbalance of power on the international stage, and that this imbalance of power allows even the major global powers to get away with things that they shouldn't be getting away with. We think that this was a valid point on proposition, and that opposition did not address this sufficiently. However, proposition also forgot about it throughout the rest of the debate and didn't mention it again. And in the end, this didn't take up enough room in the debate to consistently sway us for side proposition on this clash. So in a very, very narrow decision, we decided that on the issue of international influence and international oversight being an effective tool to keep governments in post-conflict circumstances in check, opposition convinced us slightly more here, but it was really close. Moving on to principle. In terms of principle, proposition came to us with I call it a utilitarian approach, even though it's a principled argument, saying that because the majority of the crimes that we are talking about are crimes of necessity and crimes of acquisition, and because we do not think that it is just for these crimes to be prosecuted in the framing of governments being very, very punitive, we bring more justice or better justice to the majority of people. What opposition did to this is they tried to mitigate, as I've already explained in the point about stability, but they also said that as a separate principle, we do need these severe crimes that are happening during the conflicts to be addressed. And because proposition did not really give us any principled analysis that justifies them leaving these crimes unaddressed, while conceding that in many cases this will have to happen, we decided to also award the principle clash to opposition. As a more general note of this debate, we think that both sides could improve on accurately attacking and more consistently engaging with the case of the other side, both in terms of characterization and in terms of actual impact analysis. We think that especially proposition could have done a better job addressing the concrete impacts that opposition pointed out on the clash of stability, which is vigilante justice, a lack of incapacitation leading to repeat offenses by people who have already been violent during the war, and also a kind of chance of public backlash from victims or family members of victims that do not believe that justice has been achieved. We think that proposition did not provide us enough mechanistic rebuttal to these points to really be a strong, engaging team on this clash. However, opposition also did not give us enough mechanistic rebuttal on proposition's point of the situation in prisons, and proposition's argumentation of the quantity of arrests and punishments made by these governments being inherently destabilizing to the situation, because community leaders are being taken out, because a lot of people are no longer able to fulfill their role as citizens because they are ostracized from society for being criminals. All of these are valid points. So both sides could have done a better job at engaging with the respective impact analysis from the other side here. Additionally, we think that while there were good and well-chosen examples on both sides, proposition focusing a lot on the American Civil War, opposition focusing a lot on the situation in Kosovo and in the more general former Yugoslavian wars. We think that both sides could have gotten more out of these examples by making them more relevant to a current context, by explaining why they are representative for the majority of cases that are likely to happen, and why thus they are the kinds of examples that are relevant in this debate, as opposed to the examples that the other side presented. I hope this made some sense to both teams. If there are questions regarding the reasons for decision, you can ask them now. You can also approach us for individual feedback. Yes?
Is it okay if we approach you later on?
Definitely.
Yeah, because I think dinner is being served, as far as I understand now.
Okay,
So, yeah.
you can approach us later on.
Okay.